Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Dr. Allan Bacon. Oh, I've been looking forward to this. Great to have you back, my friend. The owner of Maui Athletics, all the way from Hawaii, Maui. You are a nutrition and fitness training educator, myth buster, lots of that stuff. Your media has been growing. It's great to see that. Public speaking, I got to see you and hang out with you at, the Real Coaches Summit last year, because you and I were at, was at our friend Tim Art's event before as well. So you did Inland Empire Fitness Conference. So yeah, it's been great to see your rise, and I'm grateful to have you back.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I mean, it's always a pleasure getting to talk with you. It's one of those things that I love, these type of get-togethers, because we end up learning so much from each other, and we're able to help so many people in these types of things. So thank you for setting this up, because it really does go a long way, I think, overall.
My pleasure. And you've been a past guest. I really do have to memorize these numbers. It goes back a little bit, but in an episode that's more geared towards coaches. But I know that was actually one of the most popular downloads I had. So I know your audience, your people show up. So if they're listening, guys, thank you. Okay, right into it. Supplements. So I referenced you presenting at the Real Coaches Summit, and you actually did a big presentation of supplements. I thought, okay, cool. This is actually a good topic to dive into. So there's lots of, that's overhyped. There's a handful that are proven and valuable. I want to know which ones are really worth it. I'm doing this now before, so there's a possibility a couple of supplement companies are talking to me, may be interested in like having me involved with them. And I'm like a supplement minimalist, but there's some good stuff. So I can get away with doing this episode before I have anything official.
Before there's a conflict of interest in play.
Exactly, right.
That's the type of thing, though, because when you start to look into this, it's really funny, because I've spoken around the country on this type of thing. I have formulated professionally in the dietary supplement industry for 15 years, and I actually consider myself a supplement minimalist as well. And I think that surprises a lot of people. And I think that it surprises a lot of people because when I talk about it, I'll say, hey, look, this might be a good supplement in your situation. These are what I recommend. This is what has some good backing. And I think that if we're very honest with ourselves, we realize that there is a hierarchy of what really works in fitness and nutrition, right? And supplements are probably the tip top of the pyramid. I mean, it is probably one of the least important things overall when you've got everything else. If you're trying to fill a basket, fill it with big rocks, right? These are smaller rocks. Now, that's not to discourage people from taking benefit from these types of things, because I think that they can be very beneficial. And if we pick the right ones, we can save money. We can get those benefits under the right circumstances. And I think that a lot of times what coaches don't value is the fact that these can become a very motivational part of your experience. And I think that if you remember when I spoke at Inland Empire, one of the topics was on motivation. And one of the things that I spoke about there was creating a pregame routine. And I think that supplements work really, really well on this type of thing. I mean, if you take a pre-workout, and this is how you do it every single time you go to the gym, and that starts to instill that habit and that routine in play, it can not only give you those physical or physiologic benefits that you're looking for, but it can be part of those routines that actually bring you to long-term success. And I think that we tend to value those a little bit. And that's not the best selling point on supplements, but let's talk about the ones that actually do make sense, so you're not wasting your time and wasting your money.
I'll give a quick example of like what you just said in practice. For probably 2 decades of going to the gym, I've had my quote post-workout shake. But doing that since we used to believe the anabolic window was really essential. Now we know it's really not a thing in the way that we used to believe. And it has creatine in it. So why do I do that? Well, I need to hit my daily protein threshold. I'm a bigger guy, so it's challenging to do it. You don't need to have the shake right away. I go home and probably have a meal afterwards. But it helps me consistently, reliably remember to take that extra protein. And I put creatine monohydrate. I know we're going to talk about that, because it's easy to forget something like creatine. If it's always going in my post-workout shake, the timing doesn't matter based on the research as I understand it. To me, I think if there were something that didn't show up in the research, logically speaking, where you're more insulin sensitive post-workout, you might get some sort of preferential absorption in it. I don't think the research is really like strong on that one. But For me, I just remember to do it. So it is part of my post-game ritual.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about making your life easier, right? And so if there are these little things that you can do to make you much more likely to take these type of things to get the benefits, to have it fit in your lifestyle a little bit better, then this is exactly what you need to do to make that happen. Now, creatine and what you were talking about is a good segue into it. Obviously, a lot of the times we talk about supplements, the podcasters love to point out these really niche supplements that probably don't do a whole lot because they're new and it's flashy. I mean, NAD, NMN, those, longevity supplements, and we could talk about those a little bit later, but those really kind of come to mind. And it grabs people's minds and they're like, oh, that's really cool. Longevity sounds great. I would love to have greater quality of life. And then you realize that there's no backing to them, and showing a mechanistic change, you've got some different changes in some of the microbiology that doesn't necessarily lead to a health outcome is beside the point when you're trying to sell a podcast episode. So let's talk about the ones that really work. And creatine is one of those great ones. And it's funny because there was a big systemic review and meta-analysis that came out in 2023 or early 2024. And their conclusion was that the effects were very mild or very modest, I think it was their words. But what was interesting is if you actually look at the raw data that they presented to make this conclusion that it was modest, they showed that it increased lean muscle building by about a third. And so if you were going to originally build 3 pounds of muscle, you ended up building 4 pounds of muscle. To me, that doesn't sound modest. That sounds very like it. I was surprised at how effective it was. And then I saw the conclusion. I was like, holy shit, they came up with modest based on this. And I didn't even believe the raw data from that data set. But creatine, the reason that it's talked about so much and why everybody really harps on it is because obviously it's the most proven supplement out there. And it's one of the ones that I would say literally everybody should be taking. It doesn't matter whether you're 18 or 80. It doesn't matter whether you actually engage in weight training. You should still be taking it. I mean, it's good for brain health, bone health. Bone is a metabolically active tissue that uses ATP. This increases ATP production. And this is beside that muscle building effect. And I bring this up because we get so many, this is going to sound stereotypical, but I got a lot of older female clients, and creatine is kind of one of the last things on their mind. But this is the same population that has the biggest issues with osteoporosis. And so just to show that the muscle building isn't the only thing that this really gives us is a very important thing. And as long as you don't have anything that precludes your use, a active kidney issues. If you don't have kidney issues, it's not a problem. Potentially asthma, potentially an allergy to creatine. Outside of that, you should probably be taking it.
Is there robust research on creatine supplementation for bone health, especially in the context of osteoporosis? I mean, it stands logical reasoning that it's solid enough where I'm like, I don't think I need to see a study on that, right? But
yes. No, there's certainly evidence for that. Now, it's probably more effective in those situations than it is for you or I. So if you and I go to the gym regularly, if we eat enough protein, we're probably, we're probably depositing enough bone for it to be a wash from creatine itself. But in those populations that are susceptible, having that extra vitamin D, having the creatine, having calcium in their diets that they're probably sorely lacking, and particularly when you don't have the benefits of loading from weight training, it's only going to increase in its effectiveness under these situations. So these people that think that they don't need to take it are probably some of the most viable people to actually take it. And I want to point out all these benefits because yes, there are really great benefits to hypertrophy. And if we're to believe that most recent systemic, that 1/3 rate, increased rate, is very large in my opinion. I think it's probably a little bit too large, but it's there. And there's not really much debate on the fact that it's there. If you look at the breadth of evidence, pretty much everybody agrees that it's there in some capacity. And the cool thing about creatine is we originally had people arguing that oh, well, when you take creatine, then you're going to hold a little bit of water weight, right? And so these lean body mass gains are likely due to that water weight. No, when you actually control out for the water that you're holding from it, we see direct and indirect muscle hypertrophy effects.
Because
and so
because mechanistically, it is improving your short burst, intense strength output. And so it's enhancing your ability to train. And therefore, by enhancing your ability to train, you're getting the adaptations from that enhanced training.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're able to lift more or lift, either more load or more reps over time, that's going to add up to more lean muscle building. Now, obviously, if you look at it in the context of 4 weeks, yes, those gains are probably water related, and that's okay. But that's not why we take creatine. And so, if you're a person that does a DEXA scan for whatever reason, and I'm not recommending this, but you do a DEXA scan and then you take creatine for 3 weeks and you do a loading phase because you want it to saturate as quickly as possible. You take a scan in 3 more weeks, you're probably going to show a very significant increase in lean body mass. But that's water, whereas the direct effects from the training will take time. But the good thing is there's no evidence in history that suggests that we need to cycle off of this anyway. So once you go on, just stay on forever and you can continue to have those benefits. And just like you were saying, if we have a situation that makes it much easier for us, like if we get into the habit of taking it after we train, just because that's the way that we do it, and then we don't forget it, great. And again, if we have these older populations and it's particularly a problem for them to get in an adequate protein amount. Well, a protein shake is probably something that's really good for them. And so if they've got a protein shake that also contains an adequate dose of creatine, there we go. You're knocking out all these things at once. Take it the time of day that you would most likely take it and be, consistent with that and move on with your day. And like you said, there is some evidence that suggests taking it post-workout might provide a little bit of a benefit, but that only seems to matter within the first 3 or 4 weeks or so. And then once you reach saturation, it doesn't really matter anyway. So is it going to be beneficial? I mean, it could get you to saturation a few days earlier, but does that really make a difference long term? Because, no, because you're probably going to have 1 or 2 more reps in your weight training during those weeks, but that's not going to add up into any appreciable muscle gain. So this timing for taking in creatine it's really just up to whenever you can get it in, because the end results are not going to change depending on when you do.
And creatine is a molecule that is found in our muscle cells naturally anyway. Like the comment about an allergy was sort of surprising. I wasn't aware that such a thing was possible because we have this stuff in our bodies to begin with. It's not like, as you said, we don't get, it's not like caffeine where you become sensitized to it and you need more and more. It is just simply a molecule that is part of our what is it? Creatine, ATP,
It's endogenous.
CP,
And so for the allergy comment, I will typically say that with literally every supplement that we talk about. It's going to be extremely rare with quick. And usually we only see case studies of people reporting these types of things. We never really see this as like a across the board type of thing. And maybe it's just the amount that a person took at one time. Maybe it's unrelated to the creatine itself, but those are those typical disclaimers that you give whenever you're talking about supplements.
What about things like GI issues when consuming creatine? You sometimes have anecdotal reports of that. What's going on there?
In many cases, it's because they're taking too much at one time. And this is one of the reasons that we've moved away from recommending that loading phase. And the loading phase, for the people that don't really know, is you take 20 grams of creatine every day for, a week or whatever the supplement manufacturer tells you to take it. And it will bring you to saturation faster. Now, that's true. It does. But you're going to reach saturation in about 3 weeks of 3 to 5 grams anyways, depending on your body size, or maybe even a little bit larger for somebody of your size. Um, and within that 3 weeks, just like we talked about earlier, if you're getting some increased volume or increased load, it's not going to be significant enough to make a massive difference. So you may as well just not waste the money. You may as well avoid the GI distress and just go with that 3 to 5, or maybe in your case, 7 to 10 grams. Because larger guys with more muscle should probably take some more. There's some evidence that for the brain benefits, we might need a little bit more than the typical 5 grams recommendation. But as long as you're taking that standardly and you're doing a micronized form of creatine monohydrate, because the micronized can help with some of those absorption and GI distress issues, then you're doing what you need to do. And I think that a lot of this is a problem because people were doing that loading phase and or combining it with large amounts of caffeine. Now, this is a very common one because people do this all the time before they train, and they'll even do it after they train. And what's really funny is you see people fearmonger the combination of creatine and caffeine.
I've done it. I've literally said to people, and I remember your presentation on this to say that the evidence actually doesn't point to it. Now, we
Yeah.
also know what caffeine does. You get a good dose of caffeine and you go right to the bathroom.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't blame people for thinking that because and there was a certain period of time where a couple of those studies came out very like close back to back. And so we thought, okay, well, these guys that are taking creatine and caffeine at the same time are showing decreased performance. What the hell's going on here? And then when we started getting more and more evidence, we started seeing, and there was systemic reviews that were done on this, and we started seeing, okay, well, the only times this seems to be an issue where we see decreased performance when these two are combined is when we're using very large doses of creatine and very large doses of caffeine in conjunction. And so we have these loading phases with people taking like 300 milligrams or more of caffeine, and they're running to the bathroom. And of course they are. And when your stomach is upset, when you have these GI issues, you're not going to be lifting as heavy as you possibly can. And so it was more of an issue of a gastrointestinal problem than it was an actual interaction between the two molecules because we don't see any issue with these two. There's no mechanistic reason why these two should counteract each other. And as far as the data goes, there doesn't appear to be one.
Okay.
So it's a good thing to take into account. It's something that you'll probably hear a lot because it still makes its rounds, but it's not something to actually be concerned about. And so if a supplement company wants to sponsor you and they've got creatine and caffeine in their pre-workout, it's perfectly fine. There's no problem
Good.
there.
I'm actually gonna like this will be like a little bit of a side quest, but for anybody who knows me through my media, I will happily shout out brands that I actually like and believe in. And a lot of my friends, people like a Luca Hosavar or a Don Saladino and others who have brand endorsement deals, they will try a product for a long time before they will, ever sign on with it. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I bought a King Kong backpack and I fucking love the thing. It's expensive. I was looking for a good travel backpack and I posted it on my social media. Now, my aunt, who buys me all sorts of travel stuff over the years, bought me a King Kong gym bag years ago, and I still have the thing. I love it. It was great, durable as all hell. It's great quality stuff. And so I watched a ton of YouTube videos on travel stuff, backpacks, whatever. And the King Kong Edge, I think, is the one I got. It was just the one I liked the most. It scored really well, so I went and bought it and ordered it. So I posted up on social media, just hey, I like this backpack, right? Anyway, King Kong, the brand, I tagged them. They followed me. They messaged me. And so we're chatting a little bit, and I told them the same story. And they're like, "Oh, well, what's this bag you have before?" So I sent a screenshot, like, "Oh, it's one of our originals. Do you want a new one?" And so they sent me a brand new duffel bag, which is gorgeous and awesome. And so, like, for me, I just like the bread, I like the stuff, and then they turn around and turn out to be really awesome. So that is how. But like, I'll be very clear. If it ever happens that I have a brand that like actually endorses me, I will approach it this way. So I'm actually going to shout out the two supplement companies I've had a little bit of experience with. So recently, Momentous sent me a bunch of stuff. So I've been trying it, the creatine away, whatever. The sleep magnesium supplement, fucking love it. A multivitamin, omega-3s, a couple other things there. I'm like, honestly, this stuff's really good. And then so my friend Brett Bartholomew recently announced that he's sponsored by Momentous. Luca Hosavar is sponsored by Momentous. And I like Chris Williams' podcast, Modern Wisdom, and he's sponsored by them. And so high quality brand. So I'm actually like really comfortable to say, hey, I'm really impressed with them. And then on top of it, I also connected with a pal of mine. His name is Jordan Boxer, and he is business partners with Muscle Doc Jordan Shallow, who's a friend of mine. And they're involved with a brand called Spoken. And so they've got something they're sending me, and I'm going to check that out and I'm going to evaluate it. But I know Shallow and his reputation. I know they're great people. And I know there's also the other Jordan Boxer. He is sending me some Quench. And so he's partnered up with the old BioSteel, and they've got a new brand. And so I got to try that while I was at Luca's, speaking at Luca's Vigor Summit. And I was really impressed with it. And I like drinking flavored electrolyte drinks during training, right? Like, I mean, just because I enjoy it. I will drink more water that way. So that's sort of a habit-based thing too. But I'll actually say, keep these brands on your radar. I'm going to check them out a little bit more, and I'll share a little bit more of them through my media. So, but I wanted people to understand the principle of how I go about this, as opposed to the people who are like, yeah, this supplement's the greatest thing. Like, this is the reason why I got all my gains. Meanwhile, like, someone who's been using steroids for 15 years and all of a sudden claims that this new BCAA supplement is like, integrity is a thing. So anyway, let's go back to you. And
I like how you drop BCAA because that's always the one that it was funny because you had brought up some ideas of like, oh, well, what supplements, are completely worthless and all that type of stuff. And I was like, oh man, we're gonna have to talk about aminos again. And that's always the one that people really love talking about.
Yeah.
But let's talk about a little bit more about some of the ones that can really help
Yes.
people out, and then we can shift gears. Um, Obviously some of the other ones that people have really heard about. I mean, beta-alanine is a great one. It might
Okay.
not necessarily help with maximal strength, although there is some data suggesting that in conjunction with creatine monohydrate, it might be able to. But it seems to shine with high intensity exercise lasting between 1 and 10 minutes, which makes it pretty perfect for things such as team sports, CrossFit, combat sports, anything that requires semi-prolonged bursts of intense effort. And so in as general performance enhancement, it's actually rather good. It gets downplayed a little bit in the weight training community just because we don't tend to lift our sets, for a minute or longer, but it does work for what it's intended to work for. Betaine is very similar in that manner, and betaine seems to be coming out with more and more data that every time it does come out, it seems to be very impressive. I mean, it preserves hormones and performance under stress. And so, if you've got similar situations to what I was talking about before, combat sports, strongman competitions, CrossFit, team sports, betaine and beta-alanine would be very high up on my list as things that I would 100% be taking along with taurine. And people, they really underplay taurine because you have it in just literally every energy drink that's out there. And I think that you probably noticed this when I talked about it at the conference. But the cool thing about energy drinks is if you look at the performance enhancing effects that they have, they seem to be dependent on the taurine dose, not the caffeine dose in the product. It seems to overshadow caffeine. So if we're talking about things that actually work for performance enhancement, taurine seems to do really well, and it seems to be pretty good at strength endurance, and total endurance. And I've got a lot of clients that are doing triathlons and marathons these days. I have no idea why. I'm not pushing them towards them, but these people are crazy and they want to enjoy it. And so I've got them all on these things that are really going to help them out there. Beta-alanine and betaine. Beta-alanine may not be the right choice for a really long endurance sport, but betaine and taurine could be very good under those conditions. And the one that I always like to talk about, the last one for performance enhancement and maybe some direct muscle building, are pump supplements. And these are ones that this surprises a lot of people. And this is something that is downplayed a lot by coaches. And I'm not 100% convinced, but there is some evidence, and it's decently strong, that points towards the fact that pump supplements could actually increase both strength and hypertrophy outcomes. The strength outcomes might come by enhancing calcium release and the efficiency with which calcium initiates force production. And the hypertrophy benefits may be due to exercise-induced hyperemia, cellular swelling, and the promotion of satellite cell differentiation. So it's funny when people talk about them and they're like, well, are these just cosmetic supplements? And the answer is, if they're actually true nitric oxide enhancers like nitrates, they may actually help with maximal strength and hypertrophy.
But theoretically, also, these two things apply. One is you get a good pump and your muscles are literally larger. So structurally, you actually have more structure to bear load, move mass, enhanced training. And two, if it's nitrous oxide and you've got improved blood flow, that improved blood flow can also fuel better training performance in the moment. The same way with creatine, if you get better training performance on average across time, you simply get those results compound. Does that make sense, or is that a reach?
Theoretically, it could. I mean, I'm on board with that. And again, this is one of those things that I don't really see any downsides to this type of thing. And if all we get from this is feeling like we're a little bit bigger, if we take pictures and they make us look nicer on Instagram and we're competing with the guys that are on 3 grams of gear every day, I mean, you're not hurting anything. And if it makes you motivated to do it, hell, this is a good reason to do it too. Because if you feel good when you're lifting, you're going to lift more. I mean, that
But
motivation is a really big thing.
plus, placebo is a hell of a drug, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let me rephrase. This will definitely build your strength and your hypertrophy. We can put a little disclaimer underneath that, and now people can pick up a pump supplement. But I mean, there is reason that it could work, and people really underplay these types of things. And it's like, you know what? It's fun. It is often well dosed in good companies pre-workouts anyways. And so if anything, it's no negative and maybe a potential initial additional benefit. So I like to point that out because people do really kind of get down on those types of things, but we might find out here in the future that they really are helping. And anything in conjunction with the creatine and some of these other supplements that we've talked about can add in those last few percent. It's not the most important thing in the world, but those last few percent are nice. And if you're spending, your time, if you're really committed, if you're really having fun doing this, why not get a few extra percent out of these things?
I suspect, and you alluded to this earlier, but the the cost of these things is a major thing. Like if you've got someone who, financially to do these things would be really stressful, then guess what? It's probably not even worth considering. But if you have someone with like abundant financial resources and you want to throw these investments in, and you're also doing most of the other basics really well, there's probably minimal downside.
Well, if you had to prioritize what you should spend your money on, I would always tell people three things. And I've got a list that I give my clients when they start working with me, and I always prioritize three things. I say creatine, a well-dosed fish oil, and a protein supplement if it's needed. And honestly, for most people, a protein supplement is needed just because it's very difficult in people's lives to spend as much time, eating the meals to make it fit from a satiety standpoint. Various reasons why it's difficult to get in the protein that they need to. And so those three are very, very important and very good returns for your investment. And with
Now,
fish oil, what I want to stress
yes.
is do not fall into the mistake of accidentally focusing on the omega-3 numbers because the omega-3 numbers do not matter. The active constituents are the EPA and the DHA amounts. If your fish oil does not list individually the EPA and DHA amounts in the product, throw it away, get a new one. You're going to need to find something that's better quality. But if you can see the EPA and DHA amounts, you want to shoot for 2 to 5 grams per day to get the full benefits from a fish oil supplement. Now, if you talk to the American Heart Association, they say it's 1 gram of the EPA plus DHA, but we're actually looking at some other benefits that fish oil could potentially provide, including joint health. And I think that I mentioned this right before the last conference when I spoke on it, but a new study came out suggesting that there's even some hypertrophy potential benefits from benefits to cell membrane permeability that fish oil can provide. So it's something that most people are not getting enough omega-3s anyways. There don't appear to be any downsides if you're taking the right kinds. There appear to be only upsides. If you're eating 2 fatty fish meals per week, you don't need it. How many of us are actually eating 2 large fatty fish meals per week? If we're doing anything, we're getting a lot of canned tuna. We're not getting salmon or, another fatty sort of fish that's going to be high in omega-3s.
I grab a salmon every weekend from Costco. I bake it on Saturday or Sunday, and I end up getting about 6 meals out of this thing. I'll boil some rice on the stove. I may bake some Brussels sprouts right there. I bake the salmon. So like the prep isn't too crazy. And I end
No,
up with literally 6 meals across 3 days. And I find it's very easy and practical to make that. And so that's like just a simple answer that I have to all this too. And I also do supplement with omega-3.
you may not need to if you're
I
if you're
probably
eating
don't.
that multiple times per week.
Yep.
And this is those situations where it's good to have these conversations because maybe it'll save some people money, maybe it'll allow them to focus on what really matters to them. And if you're eating salmon anyways because it's something that you enjoy and it's easy for you to prepare, hell, I mean, you're getting the benefits that we want you to get. So, be very proud of yourself for being one of the few percent that can actually pull that off. So
Wait, that's
supplements that have no place in a
let
supplement
let
regimen.
me let me pull you back in a second because I want to see what
Sure.
you have to say about you mentioned vitamin D earlier, vitamin
Mhm.
D and magnesium, because I think, as I understand it correctly, magnesium is one of the things that across society where probably most people are deficient in. Is that correct?
Yep,
And
that is correct.
is there anything to supplementation of magnesium? Because again, as I mentioned, the Momenta stuff that they sent me, there's a sleep supplement, and sleep supplements almost always have magnesium. And I notice I sleep better. I mean, this is anecdotal, but I notice that I sleep better when I take magnesium-based sleep supplements.
I actually program a magnesium supplement for most of my clients as well. I think that it's a great one to have in. It's usually about 200 to 300 milligrams in a day. And please, for the love of God, get a form that is not magnesium oxide. If you get magnesium oxide, you're going to shit yourself. Get any kind of get any kind of chelated form. You're going to be very happy with me if you do that. And I know this because when I first started dating my wife, You know, 15 years ago, I was like, let's get you on a magnesium supplement. She's like, okay, I'll go pick one up. And she kept like running to the bathroom. She's like, what's going on? And we finally figured it out. She picked up magnesium oxide. So I changed the way that I word that every time I talk to people about it.
That's
As
going
far
to be
as this,
thrilled that you told that story.
I know it's a great one to be putting out on public air, right? So the sleep benefits. As far as I know, the research is very hazy about this, but I'm actually in the camp with you where I believe that it's true. And I believe that it's true because I've done it myself and with like thousands of people that I've recommended supplements to, they all seem to agree that helps. And you know, that's the weakest form of evidence that there possibly is. But if you're going to need to take it anyways, because it's literally one of the most deficient minerals in our diets. And you know, people will always bring up, well, should I be taking a multivitamin and all that kind of stuff?
Mm.
The benefits for a multivitamin are extremely hazy. Now, if we look at the breadth of evidence, it suggests that there's probably no negatives to taking the large majority of multivitamins out there. It probably won't help you outside of a few niche situations. But you know, if you're somebody that's maybe in like a contest prep type of diet, I would really be using one as nutritional insurance. But the evidence is much stronger for individual vitamin and mineral supplementation when we suspect or know that there is a deficiency. And magnesium is one that more often than not there's a deficiency of some kind. We're not at optimal levels. They're just, if you look at anybody across, you know, United States, Europe, Canada, everybody is deficient in magnesium just because of what we eat in our typical diets.
Are there
And
any
so
key foods that people could try to prioritize to get more dietary magnesium?
nuts and legumes
Okay.
tend to come up quite a bit. You know, there's meat, certain meats have a good bit of them, but you know, this is the type of thing that I would really just pick up a supplement and have it as insurance for myself in those types of situations. But the sleep benefits, I believe that there is sleep benefits to them because people are typically deficient in these, and we're probably benefiting from taking them anyways. You may as well just put it around your sleep and see if you like it, and if you don't like it, take it another time. You know, and so again, you're not going to lose anything doing this, and so there's the benefit there. But yeah, I'm on board with you helping with, you know, your idea of it helping sleep because that's been my experience as well.
Okay, now vitamin D, and then I want to hear the ones that you're like, nah.
So vitamin D. Vitamin D has a little bit of back and forth research because it does raise um, blood levels. It doesn't always produce the health effects that we want, but when you're in situations where you're not able to spend time outside and get enough sun, I still think that it's a really good one to be able. Yeah, I think it's a good one to be
Northern
able to take.
Canada, like
Yeah.
Irish
At
background
least you're very
there.
pale,
Yeah,
just like me. So we convert vitamin D much more readily than everybody else.
true.
But you know, I'm Scottish, and so at least we can convert it better than most everybody else. But if you're in a situation, you know, like exactly like you're in, yeah, I would be taking it too. And how much should you take? I can't answer that. The only way to be able to get that would be to take a blood test to really figure out where you are. Because again, people are going to convert differently. You're going to spend different amounts of time outside. You're going to be wearing different layers of clothing. And so people always want, well, how much should I take? I got no clue. What you need to do is go to your doctor, get that blood test, and figure out how much you should take. Because the recommendations for things like magnesium, they tend to work pretty well as a general recommendation. Vitamin D doesn't seem to work that way. And vitamin D doesn't seem to work that way because it requires different levels sometimes to different intakes sometimes to raise blood levels for certain people. And so you'll see a doctor recommend X amount. Well, in supplements, our upper intake limit is around 4,000 IUs, but you'll see a doctor give people like 50,000 for like a month. And so it might be indicated for that person and it might make sense. But that's why if you ask a person that, you know, works in supplements or does research in supplements, they could give you a range, but you may have to go well above the range that they can recommend based on your blood test specifically. So this is where I would get a blood test anyways and figure out what you're doing and where you should go to be able to do that specifically.
Are there any other supplements that blood tests can be useful to give you an indication of, hey, there's value here?
I mean, any of the vitamins and minerals. If you go out and you suspect a deficiency of some kind, that would be something that would be beneficial. Um, you know, and you'll see some A, E, zinc, magnesium, some of these other ones, D, that tend to be the common deficiencies in people, and it might be worthwhile to test yourself in some of those when you first begin a fitness journey so you can figure out where you are, or test yourself 3 or 4 months in after you've revamped your diet, because it would probably be a good idea to give your diet a little bit of a chance to work. Um, and then figure out where you go from there, because maybe the foods that you're choosing aren't rich in one or the other, and then supplementing in some way might be a smart thing. But this is where people get the confusion and the distinction between multivitamins and some of these specific vitamins and minerals. The evidence is much stronger when you are fixing a problem that you have, rather than when you're taking the shotgun approach and you're just like throwing it at the wall and hoping that it sticks. And that's not to talk badly about multivitamins, but we should really temper our expectations. And that's one of the reasons that multivitamins aren't on my main list of these are what you should really be taking, because the return on them is probably not as high as what one would think.
Okay. The stuff you're like, nah, this is a waste of time.
Well, supplemental aminos will always, top that category, just because of the fact that it's been pushed so hardcore for so long. And unfortunately, it's been pushed really hardcore for so long based off of essentially unnuanced data. And it's not that you can't find situations in which they work, because you certainly can, but that's where the confusion comes into play. Because I don't want to say that people are trying to sell you on supplements. Yes, some people are, but I think that a lot of times those researchers, when they came out with this research, they just didn't have the breadth of research that we have now to be like, okay, well, there was the problem with that study. And so when these studies were trickling out beginning in the early 2000s, the first two studies that I remember looking at them, one was on mice that were essentially drowning, and they had been starved, and then they give them supplemental aminos, and the ones that had the aminos were able to swim longer. And then another one was in wrestling competitors that had been trying to make weight for a competition. And so when you're trying to make weight, you're both drastically cutting your calories and drastically cutting your hydration. And so the ones that were rehydrated with supplemental aminos were able to perform a little bit better. And so, it was very promising in the beginning, and then it makes a whole lot of sense. Well, we need aminos to repair and build muscle. So the logical next leap was, well, we can build more lean muscle with this type of thing. And then we started looking into the research, and we found that if you had at least about 1.1 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight or more, I mean, that's pretty low. It negated any of the benefits that we would see from aminos. And this doesn't matter whether it's BCAAs or EAAs, because people are trying to make that shift to EAAs now, because BCAAs has kind of gotten that bad rap, and they're like, well, let's switch over to EAAs because it's still super cheap and we can make a lot of money. But we don't see the benefits there either. And some of the most recent research, there was a systemic review that came out in 2024 that looked at supplemental aminos, and it came to the conclusion that it increases recovery. And this is true, but again, it's a conclusion that lacked nuance. Because if you look at the studies that suggest improvements to recovery, they were either compared to a non-caloric control, or they did not show any benefits when compared to an isocaloric control. And what that suggests to us is that it's actually the calories doing the work and not the aminos. And this can be confusing for people, because the FDA has a loophole that allows you to sell supplemental free-form amino acids, and you don't have to list calorie content. So these amino acid supplements actually have calories, but they all put 0 on the bottle, because if you were a company that put 50 calories or 65 calories or whatever it has, the consumer's not going to buy you. They're going to buy the one that says 0. Because what do people love to do? They like to drink it all during the day because it tastes great. And, I get my aminos and it's really helpful. The calories that they're taking in is comparable to a per gram, like common table sugar. And so we have these situations where, okay, well, I want to take it because I'm training fasted. Well, Wolf 2017 looked at that, and it found that there was actually lean muscle loss when taking BCAAs when fasted. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take it to recover. And then it's like, well, if you really want to recover and it has the same calories per gram as sugar, and sugar causes better recovery and
it's cheaper,
and it tastes better for most people, and it increases performance better, why wouldn't I just buy sugar? Why wouldn't I get Gatorade? And so, when we start to look more and more in depth at these types of things, it starts to go, okay, well, maybe there's not this really big reason to buy these supplements. Maybe there are only some niche cases in which it makes sense. And if you want to do it, I mean, getting an EAA supplement makes much more sense than getting a BCAA, but there's only a couple situations that I can think of. And even in those situations, one, always account for your fast carbs first. And then if you want to add some EAAs on top of that, that's perfectly fine. But situations like during an endurance competition. So going back to these people that are doing triathlons and marathons, yeah, they can do an EAA supplement in combination with fast carbs. That's perfectly fine and probably beneficial for them. Single day multi-bout competitions. If you're doing a CrossFit competition, you've got 3 events in one day and you need a fuel in between and you think, okay, well, if I get a meal, my stomach's going to be upset. Okay. Can you do a protein shake? No. Okay. Can you do amino acids and sugars? Good. Go with that. And so we've got these situations in which it can make sense.
And there's a limit to the rate at which you can absorb glucose and fructose. It's actually why most sports drinks have a combination of those per a number of grams per hour. And I can't remember the exact amount, but then I'm guessing that the EAAs would be separate to that. So it would have enhanced benefits if you're literally trying to min max the exact amount of fuel you can take per hour for extreme intense endurance needs.
I would think that that's probably true. I'm actually pulling up the number right here. That's why I'm ignoring you for the moment.
That's okay.
This is good because people can actually see the numbers. The oxidation rate for exogenous glucose is 1.1 grams per minute.
Okay.
So it is rate limiting. Now, if we go to a 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose or glucose to sucrose, you can increase that by about 20%. So the first thing that we want to do, if we're worried about being rate limited because we're doing something that's super important, we're doing a competition that we want to have the best performance in. One, you probably should be taking that betaine and beta-alanine that we were talking about before. Then two, you should be looking at a glucose fructose combination in a 2-to-1 ratio because that's going to allow you to have the best oxidation rates to pull energy from that. And then if you want to add, 15 grams of EAAs on top of that, sure, knock yourself out. It's perfectly fine.
There's even another consideration. It's simply the gastrointestinal tolerance for it, the rate at which you can absorb it. And what ends up happening with a lot of endurance athletes, if you see these pictures of marathon runners who've shit themselves, it's in all likelihood because they have exceeded their ability, like they consumed glucose and or fructose or at a rate higher than what their gastrointestinal ability is to deal with it.
That certainly adds in. The other thing that adds in is they have a tendency to do a lot of glycerol monostearate. They have a tendency to do a lot of baking soda. And these things actually enhance endurance performance. But they can wreak havoc on your intestinal tract, and it requires a very large amount of these two supplements. There's a reason that I didn't recommend this earlier. It requires a very large amount of these two things, and I don't want everybody turning into, this situation where you're going for a run and you're crapping yourself, and you're like, man, I really wish I wouldn't have listened to Allan at that podcast. But they work as supplements, but it's the benefits are.
This is funny. So I was at the gym with a couple of buddies a couple of days ago, and one of them asked me my thoughts on. They're asking all these supplement things. I'm answering, and then they mentioned baking soda as a pre-workout. I'm like, I don't mechanistically understand how that could possibly do anything. And again, I said placebo is awesome, but it seemed that I've never heard of this. Like, is there anything behind this?
For baking soda, yes, but not for weight training. It changes osmotic balance and it helps you to hyperhydrate.
Okay.
And it's a buffer for hydrogen ions. And so that's actually one of the ways that beta-alanine works. I mean, people will talk about the burn during exercise. If you were to talk about that with somebody, what do you think Gen Pop will tell you causes the burn during exercise?
They'll say lactic acid, which is actually not what it is.
It's not what it is.
No.
It's hydrogen ions and inorganic phosphate molecules. And so if we're trying to prevent issues with our muscles being able to fire over long periods of time because we're picking up lactic acid. I mean, people really, they've bought into this idea that lactic acid comes from like this really high endurance training or really high pump workout training. It's that H+ ion buildup. And so if we want to mitigate that, we want things that can scavenge the hydrogen ions, and baking soda tends to do that really well. But it doesn't tend to do that really well for weight training. We're just not producing enough for it to be really viable.
So I couldn't understand how baking soda might give someone energy before workout, but I'm sure you could do all kinds of stuff.
No
Placebo
energy.
effect, if you
No,
believe
that's
it. No,
placebo.
that's placebo.
So,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
I'm glad
I
that
mean,
came up.
maybe if he wants to run faster because if he doesn't finish, he's going to crap himself. That might be motivation there, but there's no real reason from an energy standpoint that that would be working.
Fascinating. Okay, we are almost out of time. Can you do a quick, like, what are anti-nutrients? Why do influencers just like to walk through grocery store aisles and misrepresent this shit? Uh, in like 5 minutes.
Man, we had so many topics that were really good that we were going to get to for
I'll
this.
bring you back for another episode because these are
You,
great. I've got
well,
way
you
more.
should know that if I start talking, I won't shut the hell up. So that becomes a real
You're
problem, you
not as
know?
bad as Luca, who by the time you guys are listening to this, you should have had the last episode with Luca. Like, if I have a timeline, because I have something right after this, if I have a timeline, I have to be very careful and I have to like find a window in with Luca, like before I get near the limit. So, anti-nutrients.
All right. So anti-nutrients, they're compounds that reduce the body's ability to absorb essential nutrients. And this has been, I don't know why this has become a hot button topic, but it is absolutely mind-numbing to people that understand nutrition and biology that it's a thing because it's not a major concern for literally anybody unless you're going through periods of extreme malnutrition. Like there's no real situation in which anti-nutrients would become a problem. I mean, they evolved to protect plants from bacterial infections and insects. They were not evolved in any way to do anything to humans. And the way that I like to kind of compare this is that people kind of understand that there's a lot of different spiders that are venomous, right? But like a common cellar spider, if you get bit by one, it might itch a little bit and then it kind of goes away within 24 hours or so, and that's about it. To a bug, it's going to absolutely devastate their system. To a human, it's kind of like nothing. And that's what this is. Even if you're eating tons and tons of legumes, nuts, and grains, I mean, they have the largest amounts of these things that people really worry about. And, examples, phytic acid, oxalates, or
Mm.
lectins. Um, and these influencers are putting it out there as if like you're a ladybug and you're not. You're this human that has to deal with this. And so if you listen to an influencer, they'll point this out and they will justifiably say that these can lower the absorption of some nutrients, and they do. But the fact that these foods are very high in nutrients, it completely counterbalances any kind of negative aspect that these things cause. Losing 2 or 3 milligrams when you're getting 400 milligrams of whatever it is doesn't make a difference, and it doesn't hurt you in any way. And if you really want to understand the practical effects of these, just look at the outcome data. I mean, there are tons of large systemic reviews on the foods that have the highest anti-nutrients. I mean, if you look at studies of legumes, nuts, whole grains, what do you see? You see an inverse relationship with pretty much every disease in existence. You see less cardiometabolic disease. You see less type 2 diabetes. You see less hypertension. You see less cardiovascular disease. If you look at overall weight gain, like if we're talking about the obesity epidemic, you see an inverse relationship with whole plant foods and whole grains and this. If you're eating, like whole grains as a staple, there's so much fiber in there. They're so filling. Like these things aren't adding into any problems that you have. And so if these plant defense chemicals were an issue, people that were eating the largest quantities of these would be at the highest risk for disease. But we see the opposite. They tend to be healthier. And I don't want this to sound like a diatribe that is going in and telling everybody that they should be vegan because I'm that's the opposite of what I am. I am a rote omnivore. I think that there are very real benefits to lean meats. There are very real benefits to dairy. There are very real benefits to eggs. But at the same time, we can't ignore the benefits that fruits and vegetables bring to a diet. And you only get optimal health when you combine all of these things into a smart, overall nutrition plan. And so people talk about these influencers and well, why are they grabbing onto these types of things? And I think that's one of the questions that you wanted to
Mhm.
get into with it. And the answer is because a hyperbolic claim sells. If I make an Instagram reel and I say fruits and vegetables are good for you, I'll get 2 likes and everyone will be like, no shit. If influencer X, who is a carnivore, comes out and he's like, hey, I lost 300 pounds and it's because I gave up fruits and vegetables. Well, we're misattributing why the weight was lost, and we're also ignoring the benefits that that could have brought to the table. And lastly, we're ignoring the fact that if we would have had a smart diet from the beginning that also included these types of things, you may have had even better results than what you had doing what you were doing. The fact that you maintained a calorie deficit doesn't mean that fruits and vegetables are problematic. And if we're really honest with ourselves about the data and we're looking out long term, if you want to minimize your risk for problematic cancers long term, you're going to eat some fruits and vegetables. I'm sorry, we're adults. You can do difficult things. And it doesn't say anything bad about you just because maybe you fell for carnivore at one time. It means that we're all wrong. We all, we adjust as we get new information and we improve our practices. And so this is one of those things that people are really falling into because the algorithm loves to push hyperbolic claims. Because if you make a hyperbolic claim, the people that are kind of conspiracy theory or want a hack or something will hit like and they'll comment. And then the other people who really understand what's going on will make a comment. They'll be like, this isn't true because, but it gets that double engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And so these types of things that come out and make these off the wall claims really spread like wildfire on social media. And the analogy that I like to use is this is the difference where if somebody comes up to you and they say, have a smart omnivore diet, lean meats are fine, fruits and vegetables are fine, grains, dairy, a whole minimally processed diet is great. It's like learning history. And then somebody comes in and they're like, but about the anti-nutrients and, look out for all these like insulin and cortisol and all these other things that are happening. That's trying to get your history from ancient aliens. And so it's very entertaining and it's wonderful to see, but you're missing the nuance of what's actually happening there because they're showing you an example of what happens when you eat raw kidney beans by themselves, which no one is doing. Yes, if you eat a ton of raw kidney beans, you're going to throw up and it's going to cause some problems because of some of these things that we've talked about before, the anti-nutrients that we talked about. It's not great for you. The second that you cook them like any normal human will do, we're not popping these things like jelly beans. It removes the issue. And so, the only examples that I can think of that are actually really problematic, we don't eat in that manner. And so it works itself out in practicality, which is why nobody in the past 100 years, during these times that we're really moving into health and fitness, has like had any kind of negative health outcomes from eating a salad.
Dr. Allan Bacon. Thank you, my friend. You've been wonderful. I wish I had more time. Okay, so everyone can follow you at Bacon on Instagram. Any other resources you want to point people to?
Just make sure you spell my first name correctly. When you spell Allan, it's Allan. Otherwise, you won't be able to find me. And you can certainly go to my website at mauiathletics.com. There are links to all of my social media down below. There's a heavily research-backed blog that's got a lot of really good free information for everybody. And if you've got any questions, reach out anytime. I'm happy to help.
You're amazing, my friend. Great to have you on. I know your tribe are incredible. They show up, they support you. So if anybody listening is here from Allan's stuff, you know what? I've got a lot of other great episodes that I guess I'm not sure what number you'll be in the intake, but all the recent stuff is really geared towards more of a general audience. I think coaches are still going to love this stuff. The old stuff is very like, hey, career development, fitness industry stuff. But charting a new course, I want to reach a broader audience. You guys can help me. Take this. Someone in your world needs this. The person you thought of, go slip this into their DMs. This is going to do me great favor. It's going to help them. It helps this grow. It helps more people find Allan and support the guy that you guys love so much. Allan, thank you, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.